Hey Sam, good to talk to you. I'm Armenian Orthodox. How are you?
Okay, I'm fine. So you're Orthodox. Okay, so that means you're okay.
I had a question because I've been intensely studying Christology,
Good.
so I just wanted to see if you wanted to weigh in, please. Give
Maybe.
me some guidance on
Maybe.
like the differences between miaphysitism, held by the Oriental communion, versus deophysitism,
You
held
hold to
largely
miaphysitism.
by everyone else.
Yeah, you hold to miaphysitism, right? As an Armenian.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So what do you want to know exactly?
Just in terms of like metaphysically the differences, because I've been like dissecting um like very nuanced differences, but I just want to know if like
What's the nuanced differences that you've been dissecting?
yeah, so like in terms of the conclusions primarily, like I'm just comparing um like the starting point to the results of both metaphysics, but
Okay, go ahead. Tell
specifically
me the results.
yeah, so it's like for miaphysitism, which of course I hold to as an Armenian, it's because it's one composite nature after the union.
Composite nature. Obviously, composite means it's not a single nature. Composite means that it is consisting of more than one aspect, right? So we'll say aspect because you don't want to say two natures, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to contrast that and get your weigh in, please, on that. So, miaphysitism versus dyophysitism, in which they say two natures, but
Yes.
in a hypostatic union
Hypostatic meaning
after the
united to one
union.
person. Yeah. The hypostasis of the Logos has a divine and human nature.
Hmm.
Okay. So what's the conclusion of your research? Because you're asking me about the other position. The other position saying the one hypostasis, meaning the one person, uncreated Logos, has a divine nature and a human nature. So he's not
Hmm.
two persons, right? And it's not a mixture of two natures creating a third one. It's simply one uncreated person who is truly divine and truly human and has the properties of both natures inseparably united in one person.
Correct. And so I just wanted to, because I've been intensely studying both sides of this argument for a long time as of right now, but I just wanted to like really intensely dissect specifically the end result of miaphysitism, in which like
I'll ask you
having
what have you arrived at? I'm saying what is the conclusion you've arrived at? So what have you arrived at? I still don't know what you've arrived at.
right. Yeah, so I would still say that miaphysitism is it's more historical and it's doctrinally more pure, and it's more consistent with the Council of Ephesus and the dogmatization of the Christology.
So
So I would
okay.
say it's more consistent and
So are you
accurate.
more consistent with the ante-Nicene fathers, like Justin Martyr and Irenaeus, who described the generation of the Word as existing within the mind of God, and he wasn't the Son, but he was the Word in the mind of God, and then God begets him out of himself, and that's when he becomes the Son? That's what the Christians taught before Nicaea. So are you consistent with them?
I honestly have not read enough to like formally conclude, but it's just, uh, in terms of Ephesian Christology, I just want to
Okay.
make
Ephesus
sure
comes in
which.
431. Just Martyr, Irenaeus,
Right.
their children come in the 2nd century. So if you're
Uh,
saying it's more pure and more historical, then you're not historical and pure enough. Because if I go before Nicaea,
mhm.
Justin Martyr, Tertullian, Irenaeus, and others articulated the begetting of the Son in two stages. That the hypostasis, the person of the Son, exists in God as his reason. He wasn't the Son, but God's reason, logos, in his mind. And then when God begot him, meaning summoned him out of himself to then use him to create, that act of begetting is when he became the Son prior to creation. Do you hold to that begetting?
Definitely, I would say no.
Then you're not pure enough. So why'd you stop at Ephesus? Why don't you go back earlier?
Yeah. Well, I certainly have to spend more time studying. I just particularly, Sam, wanted to ask you, like, in terms of the conclusion of miaphysitism, of saying one composite nature, because the two natures are, of course, compositely one. Is
Just
the
like Adam and Eve
implication?
are one?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I
Just like
wasn't
Adam and Eve are said to be one, no longer two?
correct. One flesh. Yes.
So they're no longer two flesh and two genders?
No longer two, but they are one. Yeah.
So they're not two flesh. So Adam now has female body parts and Eve has male body parts?
No.
So even when you tell me they're no longer two but one, you're not denying that they are two, but they're inseparably united.
Correct. And that's exactly
Well,
the heart of what I wanted to ask you,
and that's
Sam.
the
Is that
point.
uh-huh.
But I don't think you're getting my point. And I'm not trying to cut you off.
Uh-huh.
If you were listening to me, I just told you, you accepted and agreed that there is a thing such as progressive illumination, so that
Hmm.
even though people later on may describe doctrine formulated differently from the generations before them, that doesn't mean they're wrong, and that doesn't mean that they're being unfaithful to tradition. Why do you think I use the example of Justin Martyr and Tertullian? Because I don't know of anyone after Nicaea or Constantinople that articulates the eternal beginning of the Son the way the second century Logos apologists did. Now, no one condemns them as heretics because they weren't. They were proto-Trinitarians. But I'm not aware of anyone after Nicaea and Constantinople that articulates it the way they did. So when you say it's more pure and more historic, you're not pure or historic enough because you're not articulating it the way they did in the second century. But you would tell me, well, things progress, and in light of new controversies, it is not a sin to then elaborate and come up new ways of articulating ancient truths without this meaning that you're less pure or unfaithful to the tradition. That's exactly what the other side will say to the miaphysites. That's my point.
Right, exactly, and thank you for your answer, Sam. Because I want to increase my knowledge about the Christological councils, of course, even pre-Ephesus, and just really compare and contrast the two Christologies, which are held largely today in
Don't stay
Christendom.
at Ephesus. Go back to the second
Hmm.
century. Read how Justin Martyr, Tertullian, Irenaeus. Tertullian is
Hmm.
not a father, not because his views on the Trinity were heretical. It's because he ended up following a so-called prophet named Montanus. But Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, they're saints of the church. The way they articulate the Trinity, you wouldn't articulate it the way they did today. That either means you're not pure, you're not faithful, or they're heretics. It's neither. They're not
Hmm.
heretics. They are Trinitarians. And you're not a heretic because they didn't have to address and deal with issues and controversies that forced later Christians to articulate the Trinity in more precise and accurate manners, likewise the natures of Christ. So this is why I have no problem with those who are Miaphysites, and that Miaphysites should have no problem with those who come later and want to emphasize the distinction in the natures, not
Hmm.
because they think that this somehow makes Christ two persons, but to simply safeguard the fact that there are things that Christ does that, as God, could not do. For example, God does not sleep, right? Jesus slept.
Correct. Hmm.
So you can say God slept as a man. God doesn't die, does he?
No, never.
But Jesus died, so he's not God?
No, he did. But of course, in his human nature.
Oh, so now you just distinguish the human nature from the divine nature. But wait, you're not supposed to do that. It's one composite nature.
Right. And so this is exactly getting to my point, Simon, just because
Yeah.
I think like contrasting the one composite nature
Yeah.
compared to the two natures of defuses, it just to me, so I wanted to get to like get your way in once again. It's just to me it makes the result of defuses makes more sense in terms of
The result
that you
of
have two natures in a singular hypostatic union rather than
what
combined
what
without
makes
mingling
more
in
sense? You speak
nature.
too fast, brother. It makes more sense. You speak too fast.
Yeah, no, sorry about that. No, I'm still, of course, Oriental Orthodox. It just,
Yes.
I was considering the Diophysite Christology, and to me, it seems to make more sense. But I certainly have, of course, a lot more studying and
Let
understanding
me
to
share
do.
some with you what makes more sense to someone who says that Christ is begotten. To me, it makes more sense that Justin Martyr and Tertullian would say that the begetting of the Son is when the Son, who's the Word of God, comes
Mhm.
out of God at the moment when God summons his Word to create. And that act of begetting him is when he becomes the Son. But to speak of an eternal, timeless begetting makes no sense to anyone. So why do you hold to the latter, which makes no sense? Why don't you go back to the way they articulated before Nicaea?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right on that point.
Oh, hold on, I can't be absolutely right. Then you'd be going against the Arminian Church. No, you're not getting the point. My point, it
Hmm.
doesn't matter what makes sense to you or me. We're not the
Hmm.
standard.
Hmm.
We're not the standard.
Correct. Yeah. And so I
So
want
when you
to.
tell me it makes more
Yeah.
sense, I don't
Uh,
care if it makes sense to you because the Muslims tell me that it makes more sense that Jesus is a man. It makes no sense that he's God being born as a baby and dies. See, this
mhm.
is the danger when you start making yourself and your mind the standard. It makes more sense to me. Well,
Yeah.
then someone else then says, well, it makes more sense to me, Unitarianism or Arianism.
Hmm.
So
Oh
that's
yeah.
not where we want to go, right?
Yeah, I definitely want to be very careful and certainly want to avoid that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's why I want to be very careful and I want to get your guidance
Yeah, my opinion
on
means
some.
nothing. So don't worry about my opinion because I'm not God's gift to the church. I'm not an apostle or a prophet. What I'm saying
Mhm.
is when people try to convince me
Mhm.
of one position over against the other by such arguments, I'm not convinced and I'm not impressed. But I don't have a problem with miaphysites and I don't have a problem with dyophysitism. In fact, the church that I'm in, you have to affirm dyophysitism, but the same church I'm in acknowledges the miaphysites as true Christians.
Mhm.
Catholic,
Correct.
right?
Yes. Mhm.
You know why they acknowledge them as true Christians?
Can you actually elaborate why? I'm interested in knowing, please.
Because they understand you may be using different vocabulary, but whether you like it or not, you're coming to the same conclusion because both positions are affirming Christ is one person. He's truly God, truly human. He's the God man, God as man, God in man, God who became man. And therefore, the way you articulate it, you're pretty much saying the same thing that the Catholic Church is saying. The only difference would be,
Hmm.
which again, I don't think there'd be a difference because from my understanding, because it's been a while, I haven't watched the series. They talk about one composite will, meaning because the divine nature and the human nature are now so inseparably united in one person, not fused, that
Hmm.
will is now a composite will consisting of the divine nature and the human nature. Well, then the other side would say that's why we say two natures, a human will and a divine will, but they are so perfectly, inseparably united in the one person that the human will is completely in perfect subjection to the divine will because it's a divine person who subjugates his human will to the divine will perfectly. So at the end of the day, if you really
Hmm.
listen to each other, believe it or not, you're saying the same thing.
Correct. Yeah, and actually, I certainly have come to that understanding, Sam. I wanted to see if like substantially there's any differences because I do listen to like I've consumed a lot of content regarding both sides, and some people say it's just purely semantical. Others say, oh no, it's very substantive. We have two different religions, so I want to
No,
be
we don't
very
have
careful as I approach
no.
this.
Brother, we don't. If you
Yeah.
listen carefully, because I've listened to them, I had them on my channel to make their case.
Mhm.
What
Right.
really
Hmm.
intrigued me was the fact that they quoted so many saints of the church that would speak of one nature, composite nature, one component of the union.
Hmm.
That intrigued me. But then I understood that though later on they may have emphasized the distinction of the natures, that doesn't mean that's damnable any more than the analogy I gave you with Justin Martyr and Tertullian and Irenaeus, right?
Exactly. Correct.
So that's why I say, all right, you want to go back to pre well, not pre. You want to go back to, yeah, you want to go back to pre-Constantinople and stay with Ephesus? Okay, man. It's like someone telling me I want to stay with Justin Martyr. In fact, I've met them. I'm not exaggerating. In fact, I don't know if he's listening. You have some Protestants. What's that guy's name, guys? The guy who denied the Trinity, who's now a Trinitarian. He isn't Chris LaSala. Chris LaSala. I had a discussion with him when he was trying to insist that he wants to go with the Christology and the Trinitarianism of Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and Tertullian, where they say that the Son wasn't always the Son, though he always existed. And I said, well, historically, because these men held that view, and they were proto-Trinitarians, they were Trinitarians, they are Arians, I cannot condemn you as a heretic if you want to follow that view.
Right.
Now you're asking historical, right?
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Thank you.
Let me show you. Tertullian is often misquoted to show that he believed there was a time in which the Son did not exist. He did say that. But that doesn't mean he believes the person who becomes the Son is a creature. Here, let me show you. Justin Martyr articulated the same way. Here it is. I'm going to get you the link. Go watch the session I did on this. So he wanted to now go back to this Christology. He wanted to go to Ante, Nicene Christology, the way those Christians articulated the beginning of the Son. They were all proto-Trinitarians. I hope you guys are listening. Learn about your history. Proto meaning they did not think the Son is a creature or the Spirit is a creature produced from nothing or out of created elements. They affirm the Son and Spirit are uncreated because they are in God and come forth from God and therefore not part of creation. Everyone with me there? So they are Trinitarians. Now, since Christology evolved to address Arius and Eunomius and Eutychus, these names. Darn it, these names. Anyway, they had to now adopt new language. They had to now involve new vocabulary, come up with different ways of expressing this truth. So now you won't find, after Nicaea, any of the Trinitarians talking about the Word being begotten out of the Father to be the Son at that moment before creation. They speak of a timeless generation. Does that mean Justin Martyr was heretic? No. Does that mean that later Christians were unfaithful to the tradition? No. They're all affirming the Trinity, but they're groping in the dark how to best explain it to address their enemies. So that's the same thing the miaphysites are doing with those who want to accept Constantinople, right? Or Chalcedon. Well, you guys accept Constantinople. I'm sorry. I meant, yes, I meant before Chalcedon. See, this three. It's Nicaea, Constantinople 381, Ephesus 431. They had another meeting in Ephesus to go over, what was it, the Saint Cyril of Alexandria's anathemas. Then came Chalcedon. Those who stop at Ephesus say that those who went on further and adopted new language, they're now being unfaithful. No, they had to address new concerns, new objections, new opponents, and they had to now come up with more precise ways of explaining how one person is both God and man. Similarly to what they did in Nicaea, they had to express Christ's beginning from the Father in a more precise way than Justin Martyr or Origen or Tertullian or Irenaeus did. So if I were to say, well, those who come after Ephesus and embrace the theological vocabulary of Chalcedon or Second Constantinople are in error, then I'm going to have to say all of you guys are in error, not just Catholics and Eastern Orthodox. You miaphysites, because you're unfaithful to the way they articulated the beginning of the Son in the 2nd century. So I should join Chris LaSala and go back and speak of the Word residing in God, and the Word wasn't always the Son. That's what you're basically arguing for. Your argument proves too much if we follow this train of thinking. You get my point?
Yes, very
And
clearly. Thank
look
you.
here, Tertullian, he says it.
Mhm.
He says there's a time in which the Son was not. Here, there was, however, a time when neither sin existed with him nor the Son. He became the Father of the Son. This wasn't just his view. That was the view of Justin Martyr, Irenaeus. Now, Tertullian's not a saint, but Justin Martyr, Irenaeus are saints of the church. So are you going to say now they're wrong, or are you going to say you're wrong because you're not articulating it the way they did? But that's your argument. You know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you just said it's more pure and more historical. Well, you're not pure and historical enough.
Right,
Because
and
you went
yeah, thank you
beyond
for
the 2nd century, right?
correct. Mm-hmm.
So why don't you go back to the 2nd century and say, yes, Tertullian, Justin Martyr, there was a time when there wasn't the Son. The Father becomes the Father's Son when the Word becomes the Son. Would you articulate it that way?
No.
But wait, you want to go history, right?
Yeah. Well, I want to go with whatever is the um, most clarified and
Oh, no, you
according to
don't
the
do
church
that.
correct view.
No, you don't want to say most clarified, correct you, because that's when they're going to come and say, why do you think we have to go beyond saying one composite nature and hammer the fact that he is divine and human, and he does things in relation to the human nature that would not be applicable to his divine nature? No, I don't think you want to say more clarity, because the later view brings more clarity.
Yeah, and I'm in agreement with that, Sam. So that's actually
Or,
thank you for in all this information. This is a wealth of knowledge. You opened like a whole like dimension that I have to now diligently study. So I really appreciate it.
all right,
I want to know if miaphysis is
no,
if it makes sense, if it's sufficient enough in comparison to the latter councils, or
defuses.
is deophysitism more doctrinally sound, if
Well,
you will,
brother,
in comparison?
you ask me a position that's not fair for me to answer. Why? Because obviously I'm in the
Mm-hmm.
church that speaks of dyophysitism, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me to then sit in judgment of miaphysitism is not fair, because in reality, at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
you know what determines whether you accept one view or another? You know what determines it?
What determines it?
The church you belong to. In other words, if you're a Catholic, you'd be arguing for dyophysitism. If you're Eastern Orthodox, you'd be arguing for dyophysitism. So a lot of these
Mm-hmm.
people who argue for one particular articulation of how the two natures work in one person are really simply going with the church that they're baptized into or join affirms. Because if you didn't believe what your church taught, then you wouldn't be part of it.
Right, and yeah, so I was a cradle Armenian Orthodox, and
Yeah.
of course, I sincerely and reverently love my church,
Amen.
in every way, shape, and form, doctrinally and otherwise. I just want to make sure that I'm obedient to Christ as best as I possibly can be. So I just wanted to
You're doing good, brother.
understand Christology as sharply as possible, not to like necessarily leave a communion or anything, but just to increase in understanding and hopefully to be a blessing to others.
Amen. And you will be.
Yeah.
If you're humble and teachable, God will give it to you. That's why, believe it or not, remove
Mm-hmm.
the apologists. If you go and study the scholars of any particular tradition, the highest
Mm-hmm.
levels, those who are scholars in the fields, be it Catholic or they're Oriental Orthodox, they will tell you, if you go to the top scholars, that's not my opinion, they'll tell you that in reality, when it comes down to it, we all affirm the same Christ, same Trinity, which is why the scholars don't condemn one another, whether one is Miaphysite or the other is Diophysite, because they understand, though we're using different vocabulary and terminology, we're arriving at the same conclusion, and we have the same triune God and same Christ. It's the people, how do I say it? Because I'm a part of that people. I'm in the lower level. I'm not a scholar. It's we over here on the lower level who in our zeal for our church want to defend our church to the expense of condemning other churches to hell. We're the ones who are causing the problem.
Correct. I agree.
We're the ones causing the problem because no. Armenian all the way, baby. In fact, Adam was Armenian. He spoke Armenian. You understand? That's the problem.
Yeah.
The
Right,
lower
right.
level, me, I put myself in the lower level. I'm in the lower level, me, because I'm not a scholar. I'm not. Anyone thinks I'm a scholar, may God disabuse you of that deception. I'm not a scholar. The scholars who study the original languages, whether Syriac, Aramaic, Arabic, Greek, Coptic, or even the Armenian language, the scholars, right,
Mhm.
when they study the languages in the original languages of the writings, they don't read translations. They read the original language of the authors. And when they look meticulously, they all end up concluding, even though we're using different terminology, we are basically arriving at the same Trinity and the same Christ, which is why you won't find scholars condemning the other view as heresy or to hell.
Correct. Yes.
So we're the problem. The people on the internet, we lower people that think, no, man, because if they said one composite nature, and if you then change it to, well, two natures in one person, then you're unfaithful to tradition. But then where does it stop? Because then I can say, okay, well, you're not going early enough. Go earlier, go to the 2nd century Logos apologists and start speaking the way they did, that there was a time in which the Father was not the Father, the Son was not the Son, but the Father became the Father to the Son when he brought the Word out of himself to become his Son. It's right here. Here, Tertullian. That even before the creation of the universe, God was not alone, since he had, within himself, both reason. See, this is Jesus. He's saying logos, because the word logos can mean reason, it can mean logic, it can mean word. He's saying Christ was the reason within God, and God reasoned within himself. So reason and God were conversing, showing that even in God, he's a distinct person. That reason was then uttered out of himself. He then summoned him out of himself through his mouth, so to speak, metaphorically, to then use him as his word to create. And that's when he became a second, right, from him, where now you can see he's distinct from him, and that's when he becomes the Son. And he quotes Genesis 1:3 to show when God said, let there be light, that's when the Son was born out of God. So you want to go earlier because you want to go to more ancient and more pure. Well, you're not pure enough. You're not ancient enough. Because you stopped at Ephesus. No, go back to the 2nd century.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely makes sense. Thank you for all that elaboration, Sam.
Now, by the way, brother, I'm kidding.
This
We're not
was
going to go back.
tremendous insight. So,
By the way, brother, I'm kidding, right? Well, I'm not saying we go back and talk the way they did 2nd century. Things advance, things move on.
correct. Yeah.
Hope that helped you, brother.